pleasure to be with you all here. I'd like to welcome you to the University of Johannesburg. My name is Dr. Sithembile Mbete. I'm still getting used to saying doctor. It's fun. And I will be your program director this evening. We are here for a wonderful, beautiful event to celebrate the life of Umama Albertina Sisulu, who would be turning 100 years old this year. And as part of Women's Month, we have decided to have this event in August, and the name and the theme of the event is When Women Organise. And because we're here to commemorate and to celebrate the life of an incredible organizer, who organized in a time without great international donor funds, without social media, without easy communication, and was able to really harness the energy of the people and the women around her in order to bring change to South Africa and to make it possible for me as a young black woman to be standing here at the University of Joburg, formerly Rand Afrikaans University, and to be here commemorating her life in this way. And so what we want to be doing here is not only celebrating MaSisulu's life, but also drawing lessons from it, saying what is it that we can learn from her and from her generation. And so what we hope that we'll be able to gain from the various speakers, from our distinguished panel, and also from engagement with you all as the audience, is some solutions, a way forward about how we can deal with the challenges that face us today, and really in that way honor the legacy of the stalwarts that came before us by continuing their work and dealing and really addressing the problems that face us today. And I think it's particularly significant that we're having this conversation on the 6th anniversary of the Marikana massacre, which is a real blight on the progress of South Africa's democracy since 1994, and I think, caring for the women who were affected by that event, not only the wives of the men who passed away, but the women that were then left to pick up the pieces in that environment. I think it is an opportune moment for us to be having this debate and this discussion. So it is my pleasure to welcome you all here. I'd like to recognize the Deputy Vice Chancellor for Academics of the University of Johannesburg, Professor Anjina Parek. I'd like to also recognize all the other executive members of the University of Johannesburg, members of Senate, the members of the Oliver Tambo Foundation who are here, and all distinguished guests we have here, former ministers, former ambassadors. It's a real pleasure to have you here. And also the UJ students who are the reason the university exists. So welcome to you all. Thank you for being here with us. I would now like to call upon the UJ Female Vocal Ensemble to give us a cultural item to start the evening.
Lalithatha umthwalo uyasebenza
That the Bornfries don't have culture. Can you see? You know? Yes. I'd now like to call upon the Deputy Vice-Chancellor, Professor Anjina Perek, to welcome us to the university.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Sanbonani, Sithembile, Kuyanan, and good evening. Mr. Duma Nkosi, Deputy Chair and Trustees of the Oliver and Adelaide Tambo Foundation, Professor Camilla Naidu, the Vice Dean of the Faculty of Humanities, Program Director and Facilitator, Dr. Sithembile Mbete. I remember the doctor. And I'd specifically like, and especially like, to welcome our members on the panel, Ambassador Thenjiwe Mtintso, Ms. Geraldine Fraser-Moleketi, Ms. Thandeka, Gqubule, Mbete, Ms. Nomtuse, Mbere, and Ms. Thuto, Thipe. We really have a highly distinguished set of panel members in you all. Thank you very much for accepting the invitation. To the members of the Tambo and Sisulu families, a also warm welcome to all of you. I'd like to welcome members of the university, senior executive leadership, to the staff and the students of UJ. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, and I'm really pleased to see so many men in the audience this evening. You're most welcome. There are always arguments and counter-arguments to dedicating a month or a day to remembering women. We always say, oh, here we go again. This is the month of August, and we have to celebrate ourselves. The strongest and perhaps the most persuasive argument rests on the need for disruption, to jolt everyone from the normalcy of routine. And in the case of today's event, we can pause and reflect on an incredible journey of bravery, fortitude, and courage. And if I may be bold enough to suggest, the journey of a disruptor. Yet, while we remember, despite the growing literature on African women, women remain largely invisible or misrepresented in mainstream history, or as Professor Zalada said, in mainstream history. How do we ensure that the histories of MaSisulu, amongst others, moves beyond tributes at Women's Day events and takes this rightful place at the dining table with the greats that contributed to our rich struggle against apartheid? A quick Google search confirms that despite the incredible contributions of MaSisulu, beyond casting her in the role of wife, nurse, member of the ANC Women's League, the critical analysis of her life and leadership is limited and circumscribed by inherent bias. The history of the struggle in South Africa is dominated by male figures, with women cast in marginal roles. To spend a few minutes narrating a poem that I came across. It's not by a well-known author, a poet, but it did appear in the Malibongwe ANC Women's Poetry. It's a poem by a poet by the name of Mbere. And I'm going to read the entire poem because there's a reason for my citing this. And I quote, "Let there be peace where you lie chief, brave Lutuli in the rich soil of the just. You are honored, you daughters of Africa, you whose woman begot soldiers, plodding the patriotic path of Africa. I honor you, Dumanokwe, Uncle JB. I honor you, Mandela, Sisulu, Mashangeni. You whose minds shaped power, plotting the maps of change, sculptors of tomorrow. Goldberg, Bram Fisher, Kathrada, are you not men, you who sacrificed manned the living soldiers? Peterson, fallen body, spirit of manhood, rising ever to exist. End of the poem. The description of men evokes images of sculptors of tomorrow. But it's well worth dwelling on the poet's characterization of woman with its limited circumscribing of the role of woman in the struggle. The role of woman seems to be only that of having given birth to struggle heroes. It's my assertion that these histories need to change, and that the move from the margins to the center has to take place. And the only way that we can move to the center is if we take the initiative to make sure that we move women's histories to the center. And I emphasize we women. Albertina Sisulu was honored by the University of Johannesburg with an honorary doctorate in 2007. This honor was accorded in recognition of her role and imprint on the pages of our history. By way of illustration, in 1944, Albertina Sisulu attended the first ANC Youth League conference, and she was the only woman present. In 1948, she joined the ANC Women's League, and in the 1950s, rose to leadership positions in the ANC and the Federation of South African Women. Much has been written on the Women's March in Pretoria in 1956, which she was one of the key organizers. And I'm pleased to say that I was born 2 weeks after the Women's March. The march was, like MaSisulu herself, characterized by its principled adherence to the politics of resistance and provided a template for future acts of resistance. The scale of the disruptive impact of the march requires deeper analysis, as the social context and milieu of a repressive state required strength that was tested by imprisonment and detention of many activists and ordinary citizens. Albertina Sisulu was the first woman to be arrested under an act that permitted police to detain people for 90 days without a charge. Several periods of detention and solitary confinement, banning and house arrest followed. At no point did MaSisulu's unwavering commitment to the struggle for equality waver, and in 1983 she was elected co-president of the UDF. In 1994, MaSisulu served in South Africa's first democratic parliament, and she passed away on the 2nd of June 2011, aged 92. MaSisulu, as with so many other women, fulfilled a wide variety of roles, often performing many of these roles simultaneously. She was a political activist and leader, a working nursing professional, a daughter and a sister, a spouse and a mother, a friend, the sole breadwinner for many years, a midwife, a public speaker, a seamstress, and a dedicated community person. She achieved in one lifetime enough to inspire and to serve as powerful example to those who followed in his footsteps. MaSisulu stands tall among generations of women who played a key role in the struggle against apartheid. Names such as Lillian Ngoyi, Helen Joseph, Amina Kachalia, Adelaide Tambo, Epinet Mbeki, Winnie Mandela, Fatima Mir, Gertrude Chope, Amina Pahad, Mama Zondeni Sobekwe, who sadly passed away yesterday, and to countless other women whose joint activities ensured that women in South Africa today are able to assert the hard-won rights bequeathed to us by these leaders. We cannot all be like Albertina Sisulu. We do, however, need to commit to ensuring that we explore lessons that can be gleaned from her brand of leadership. While we have come a long way since that march in 1956, the need to protest remains unabated. We are still confronted by the legacies of apartheid, dispossession, inequities, and dislocation of families, unemployment, and poverty. Race, gender, and class vexed tensions remain pervasive. By awarding an honorary degree and doctorate to Albertina Sisulu, the University of Johannesburg placed itself firmly on record as respecting, honoring, and encouraging the values of MaSisulu and of the generations of women who selflessly dedicated their lives to fighting for justice and democracy, often at great personal cost. These were women who never sought positions in the liberation movement. They never sought the limelight. They never sought accumulation of wealth. They went to jail for their beliefs and remained defiant up to their dying days. It remains a tragedy that many of the exceptional women of our time did not live to see freedom in their lifetimes. But they would have smiled a huge, satisfying smile in 1994 when South Africa attained freedom and democracy took root in our country. The question we need to ask today, are they still smiling? Or probably imploring us to continue the fight for equality, human rights, and justice. This event tonight continues the strategic conversations on why women organize. The answer to the provocative question may be self-evident given recent events which persist in a society where unequal power relationships are still the norm. The earth does shake when powerful women choose to disrupt in powerful ways that have profoundly changed the course of history. When women organize, using the phrase of Dumbo the poet, they will become the sculptors of tomorrow. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor. I found your contribution and your message so important for all of us here about changing the male stream and making it really a mainstream that includes all of us, the whole 52% of the population that's often ignored. I would now like to call upon one of our very distinguished speakers today, somebody who, as Ukula, you're starting to look like your granny too, Ms. Nontsigelelo Sisulu Singapi, who is a gender activist in her own right and MaSisulu's granddaughter. Thank you.
To the Deputy Vice Chancellor of Academic, Professor Parak, to the Vice Dean, the Faculty of Humanities, to the Program Director, Dr. Sithembile Mbete, to the fellow panelists, Ambassador Mtintso, Geraldine Fraser-Moleketi, Thuto, Thipe, Nomtuse, Mbere, and Ms. Thandeka, Gqubule. We talk about how women are forgotten, and there were 20,000 of them who marched in 1956, and only a few are mentioned. It's my pleasure to be able to mention all these women today in their distinguishedness. I'd like to acknowledge the trustees of the Oliver Tambo and Adelaide Tambo Foundation. I'd like to acknowledge Aunt Zodwa, a health professional herself, Sisulu, a radiographer, and the wife of the late Zulake Sisulu, and her sister Umamkulu Mdladlambe. We are all born of maternal and paternal heritage. I stand here representing the Sisulu family. Allow me then to start with what MaSisulu said. As difficult as it is to talk about the past, as anguishing as it is to rake up painful memories of imprisonment, torture, separation from my family and friends. I will give my testimony today. I do so in the belief that it is necessary to keep alive the memories of the past in order to ensure that the horrors will never, ever be part of our present and our future. And so begins Albertina Sisulu's testimony to the World Court of Women Against War on Peace in 2001 on International Women's Day on the 8th of March. She continues to say, the injustices in the hospital opened my eyes to the racial injustice in wider society. Very early on, she never saw injustice as perpetrated only against herself as an individual, but saw it in the workplace, but she saw it in broader society. The first sparks of her political consciousness, however, were ignited by the discrimination that she saw, that she experienced, that other nurses experienced and encountered. It would seem that she grew up, you would say, in a seemingly racially sheltered environment in the Transkei, which perhaps did not prepare her, you would have thought, for this harsh reality of the political oppression that she encountered. But she became a willing student, one who had a lived experience of injustice firsthand and discrimination when she met Walter Sisulu, who introduced her to the African National Congress. He introduced her to the politics soon after they met in 1941. How willing are you today? Are you a willing student? Are you a willing citizen to take up the cause of building this country? Walter and Albertina Sisulu had an unusual courtship. Unfortunately, in our country today, courtships end up with young women dead, burned, buried, missing, and unknown. And some, of course, that sheer psychosocial trauma, too much to bear, and they take their own lives. But theirs was a courtship that saw them going to one political meeting after another in an effort to say that the injustice that is meted out against them shall not be meted out against any other. And if they could do anything about it, they stood up, they stood firm, they stood fearless, and indeed today we can see the fruits of their labor. The story is often told that she was the only woman who attended the establishment of the ANC Youth League. You see, attending a lecture does not turn you into a professor or dean of faculties. Attending the political meeting did not turn her into a politician. She had sparks ignited in her already from her lived experiences. Her mere attendance was not a direct consequence of her activism. You may choose to attend a memorial lecture today or participate in any other social mobilization activity in the country and go back and do just what you did the day before and the day before that. Yes, there is a risk in confronting the challenges in the workplace. Ask me, I will tell you. Yes, there is a risk in confronting the status quo, the risk of speaking up, speaking out, and there is a price sometimes to be paid. As a nurse, she risked losing her license, but she fought anyway. I find it quite interesting that the very state that arrested her was the very state that employed her. The very state that kept banning her was the very one that when they released her, She went back to nursing, and they continued to pay her so she could work. A very interesting state it had been. Her banning orders included many things. I'm reminded of the philosopher Mary Daly, who talked about non-sexism within theology. She goes on exacerbated about how if the language itself does not change, and if we say God is male, therefore males are God. In the end, she gave up on Christianity as a whole, even Catholicism as her chosen religion. But be that as it may, MaSisulu, as part of her banning orders, was not allowed to enter or be part of religious gatherings. But in 1983, she had a slight reprieve, where her banning orders, I think by mistake, just by an administrative error. You know that administrative error that spells Albertina and Nontsikelelo wrong and has the wrong picture of the wrong person? That kind of a mistake, that one, in the Fourth Industrial Revolution, gave her a window of opportunity to go to the Holy Cross Anglican Church, 10 steps away from her own home, to pay her last respects to Rose Mbele, a fellow comrade who had fallen. And of course, her banning orders were reinstated, and of course, she, as we know now, has been the longest banned South African in the history of this country. She was not deterred, however, because you know, we're talking about 83. The height of the state of emergency was just about to be upon us. But allow me, though, to go fast forward into when she was elected so I can allow my panelists to go on and take us forward as the co-president of the United Democratic Front. And she speaks about how much of a mother she felt like a big mother, that this united, this democratic, this multiracial organization had been established that could take the work forward. The work clandestinely that she talked about, planting a garden and planting seeds, but there would be weeds that would take that over. And I think Ambassador Mtintso, as young women, you know, and I no longer fall in that category, but as young women, we wonder how many of the adults that come before us are planting the seeds, or how many of them are the weeds that actually suffocate the young women who come after them. MaSisulu had MaSisulu's girls because she was a groomer of young women, but she was a disciplinarian of all. She was an upholder of human rights for all, for men and for women alike. In 1991, she was elected the deputy president of the African National Congress Women's League, whose mission is solely to defend, it's simply to defend and advance. To defend and advance the cause for which they fought. Sometimes when we talk about the cause, there are young people amongst us who may not know or remember the cause. Let me help and start in 1913, when the cause was what was passed laws, when Charlotte Maxeke, in the year in which we celebrate 100 years of the establishment of the Bantu Women's League in 1913, when she stood up with a group of women and tore up the past laws. She was tearing up barriers to access, barriers to financial, to economic, to social access that as women we face today in a democratic South Africa. She went on in 1918, she said, we cannot depend on the men to defend us from the past laws when they cannot defend themselves from the very past laws that oppress them. She was not creating a society separate from men. She was simply saying, as women, let's organize separately. We might want to call that gender mainstreaming. She did not only organize against past laws in 1918. Remember, it's 5 years since 1913, but 1918 past laws are still there. She adds issues of low wages. 1956, Albertina Sisulu are the next generation. In the footsteps they go, and they form an organization. They organize. They organized to form the Federation of South African Women. Why? Because, as MaSisulu says, so that our voice could be stronger. So our voice could be stronger. Because as one or two, your voice is not as strong as the multitude of 20,000. You see, the past laws when they marched in 56 were again an issue. So if you do not defend the gains, you will surely reverse them. And that's why when she was elected, and it still is today, is to defend and advance. It's simple, Linda, to me. What are you advancing? You're advancing the cause of the total emancipation of women, not by men, but by ourselves. For MaSisulu said, it is the women who will liberate us from this oppression and this depression. Whatever the oppression and the depression it is that we face as women, today it is us, the women, who will liberate us from that oppression. I am drawing to a close. Because many a document have been written by women. Women did not simply speak and not act. And I've said at least twice now, and it's worth repeating, that when women in 1954 put together the document that they called the Women's Charter, and we look, as MaSisulu say, at the past, so that the horrors can never be repeated in the present. We see what they set out and whether we've achieved it or not. We look at the Charter for Effective Equality in 1994, drafted by South African women, and juxtapose it with 54 and see how far we've come. You want to go to Beijing? Look at Beijing Platform of Action and juxtapose how South African women led and went to Beijing and came up with a document almost identical to what the Beijing Platform of Action. That Beijing Platform of Action, in terms of what it says about women at the United Nations year after year after year, that language is a fight to keep it. It was so strong, it was so advanced, because women lead. And when women organize, women lead and change happens. I want to close with what Walter Sisulu, her husband, said to her at their 50th wedding anniversary. I'm not sure how many of us will get there, but be that as it may, standards are set so born. He said, she has kept the family together under the most difficult circumstances. Much of what we are as a family today, we owe to her. She has been wonderful, just wonderful. I thank you.
Well, sure, how many of us will have someone say that about us in 50 years? But thank you so much, Sisulu, for reminding us these days when people talk about women multitasking and it's, some flippant thing about putting on your lipstick while driving your car, and it's not. It's that women do a million different things and fight struggles on all fronts and keep places going and keep countries and families and homes going. Thank you also for reminding us about solidarity, the very importance that MaSisulu placed on that, and that she gained her political consciousness by seeing the struggles around her, and also the ones that she then had to experience. But the idea that our voices are that much stronger multiplied rather than as individuals, and that we as women are the ones who will liberate us, who will take South Africa to that next level of liberation. So thank you very much for that. Please give her another round of applause. I would now like to welcome and to call on our panel discussion to join us. I will introduce all the members of the panel, and then we are going to start with former Minister Geraldine Fraser-Moleketi. But I will introduce the panelists pretty much in order, I think, of the way that they are sitting. First, on my far left, I would like to introduce Ambassador Thenjiwe Mtintso, who is currently South Africa's ambassador to Malawi. She's a journalist by profession, but she spent her life serving the people of South Africa. She was a student activist and a political organizer with the Black Consciousness Movement. She later then joined MK and the SACP leadership, so she's a soldier. And she's been ambassador to Romania, Italy, and Cuba. She's always been active in different gender and women's structures, and really has contributed so much to the thought and to the practice of women's struggle in South Africa. Welcome, Ambassador. Next, I'd like to introduce Ms. Nomtuse Mbere, who is a development and gender consultant with over 20 years development work experience in Southern Africa. She was in exile in Botswana, and she worked in several development projects, including projects in gender-related work in Tanzania, Mozambique, Swaziland, and Zimbabwe. On returning to South Africa, Ms. Mbere devoted her time to working in women and girls empowerment, supported by UNICEF. And she's worked with organizations such as the UNDP, UNICEF, World Food Programme, and UNIFEM, and various government departments. Thank you. Welcome. Sitting next to her and in the middle of the panel, the youngest member, the youth league of the panel, Thuto Thipe, who is currently a PhD candidate at Yale University, and she's writing about the history of black freehold areas and land rights in Johannesburg from the early 1900s to the 1970s. She was a researcher at the University of Cape Town's law faculty and has taught in history, gender studies, and African American studies. She holds degrees from Yale, UCT, and Macalester College in Canada, and has published in a range of local and international academic journals. And the next member of the panel is Geraldine Jocelyn Fraser-Moleketi, who has been a strong leader in South Africa and the rest of the continent, working towards Africa's social and economic transformation. She is currently the Chancellor of the Nelson Mandela University and Chairman of Council of the Mapungubwe Institute for Strategic Reflection, MISTRA. She served as the Special Envoy of the African Development Bank. She's a former Director of Global Democratic Governance Practice of the United Nations Development Programme, and formerly a Minister of Public Service and Administration in South Africa's first democratic government. She serves on various boards across academia, government and development organizations, and is a strong supporter of intergenerational dialogue, and is a mentor to many young men and women across the continent. And so we're really pleased to have you here. And then last but not least, I'd like to introduce Thandeka Gqubule, who is a journalist of 29 years, who specializes in economics, finance, and business journalism. She's also a well-renowned author whose latest publication was No Longer Whispering to Power, the story of Thuli Madonsela. She's also written Semane Queen of the Peaceful Crocodile, the story of the Bafokeng people, which was published in 2007. She has been educated in South Africa, the United States, and in Britain, and has written for newspapers all over the continent and in Europe. She's a member of the SABC 8, a group of journalists that challenged the unconstitutional editorial policies of the SABC, and she is a mom and a sister and a wonderful activist in her own right, and it's wonderful to have you here. Thank you. So what we're going to do to kick off the discussion is that we're giving each of the panelists 5 minutes. I'll squeeze it for closer to 4, to give us some introductory remarks. I think we've been given such rich content to work with and to speak to and to remark about, and then we will go from there to opening up then to the audience. And we really want to generate a conversation both about the past, but most importantly about what we can do for the future. So yes, I would like to call on Geraldine, please, to start off for us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mbete. I came here this evening with some notes, but with a point of what I thought was raising the issues that are normally not raised. But they've raised it. It was moving away from the narrative of mother of the nation, nurturer in a narrow sense, to activist, disruptor, to audacity, the ability to engage, and the desire to do so. So I'm probably going to just raise 1 or 2 points. And the first one I want to raise, and this has been referred to, but the fact that MaSisulu, together with John Karimeng, and I believe it was, there was Martin Ramogadi, they were actually responsible for forming a committee. They formed a committee that was responsible to re-establish the ANC underground network in the second half of the 1960s. And if you look at the organization of that structure, it was one that followed the principles of the M-Plan. If many of you have heard of the M-Plan, that was actually the blueprint for the ANC at a given point, post, some would argue, the visit to Vietnam and so on. But she was in this leadership kernel. And this leadership kernel had structures across South Africa. So they were linked to the Free State, the Cape, Natal as it was known then, and beyond. And the purpose then, their link with each of these regions was also through a courier system. Now, when we think of MaSisulu, we think of the co-president of the UDF. We think of Fetso. But we don't always think about her being in the engine of what was the underground structure that existed. And just to take this forward, I want to make a link to another individual. And this is also, I must declare, out of my own personal affinity to the individual. And that was Joe Kabi. When he was released from Robben Island, the first contact he made was with this structure that was actually legal and only uncovered in the late 70s. And he would, and Eleanor Sisulu also raises this, he worked closely with Zwelakhe Sisulu in the network they were involved in, but he would go to MaSisulu for advice and guidance. And that was the nature of the leader that we're talking about. I would say, in addition to being a disruptor, she was also audacious. I think we've heard earlier that nothing held her back. She wasn't just attending the first Youth League meeting at a given point in time. She took it a lot further. She didn't just limit herself to the fact that she had this family that she was almost the sole breadwinner of at a given point in time. She went well beyond that. And it was very clear that her commitment was to equality, to ensuring that we will attain human rights in South African society. You've indicated that her involvement in FETSO and later in the Women's League was around, what did you call, defend and advance? But I think her defense was not the kind of defense we sometimes see today, where the defense is also to affirm patriarchy, Her defense was, let's ensure that we take this important battle forward whilst we mainstream, as you stated, gender. And I think, Thenjiwe, if you allow me, the two of us have been on a body at a point in time where there were many debates around this whole issue of defense of mainstreaming. Should it be done that way? Has it not been a situation where, as, if you allow me, Angela said, women don't necessarily take up the positions of power. They will remain in the background. But was that correct? I think we should have. And I want to conclude this part of your 4-minute rule on the last 60 seconds. I think if we look at 1956, and I've heard on occasion people refer to the fact that you had 20,000 women attending and it was without Facebook. But I think it was, in spite of Facebook, the reason you had that turnout was because of the nature of mobilization that took place. The fact that you had the organizing of rural women in various formations, whether it was professional, domestic workers and others. And I think what we must do today, and that's what I want to conclude to, but I do want to come back to Beijing later, if possible. I'd like to conclude with on the point that what is absent now is a vibrant, dynamic, strong women's movement. And when I refer to movement, it's a wave of the engagement of women across professions, across strata, across religious lines, across class, race, as was stated earlier, in a manner that we say we will organize and mobilize irrespective of where you are politically. But I think we'll have a problem if you're on the far right. So that's quite clear. Irrespective of where you are politically, because we want to ensure that South Africa develops a strong feminist movement in a way where feminism is not a swear word, where someone says, I'm a gender activist but not a feminist, because there's a lack of understanding of what it means. We need to make a difference, because I think that MaSisulu was a feminist ahead of her time, playing a role ahead of her time, not because she was waiting for society to catch up, but because she was ready to catalyze the change and be audacious enough to lead that change. And we really want to stand on the shoulders of MaSisulu and her youth. We must be ready to be even more audacious and step up to make the difference. And we can't have a march with 2,000 women when we had 20,000 in 1956. We need a wave, we need a tsunami, we need a movement that involves and brings everyone together.
What I'm going to do, because we've got one mic, so I'm going to ask Sithembile to go first, and then we'll move on to the next group of seating. Thank you. Good evening, honourable guests, Madame Lucy, Ambassador, Geraldine, members of the Sisulu family, and the Order of the Tambo Foundation, sisters and brothers, ladies and gentlemen. Let me take you back to the heydays of the stormy mid-1980s here in Johannesburg. I came here from Natal, and I had just found myself in the swing of things, following my friends, Firoza Adam, Shanaz Gqubule, all over the city, and found myself at Federal. I had the privilege of working there with, as an activist of the Federation of Transvaal Women. There I met MaSisulu. I was scared of her.
She was wise, thoughtful, temperate, ethical, socially conscious, concerned, loving, and a committed revolutionary. But most of all, she was our mother. That is who MaSisulu was for us. But more than anything, she was primarily an organizer of progressive structures and an activist. We owe a debt of gratitude to the Albertina Foundation for gathering us here today to talk about our departed mother, icon and model, because recently I've had reason to miss her. While these were stormy days in a strange sense, they too were days of a steep learning curve, great solidarity, solid sisterhood, and skills accumulation. We came to Federal to fight the cause of women and apartheid. But instead we gained ourselves and each other. I caught stirrings of the same feelings in the heat of the recent Women's March a few days ago. So I was not surprised when reflecting on this topic of today's discussion that I came across these feelings. The meaning of the unexpected personal, political, and social benefits of activism of those old federal days is that women's activism builds a sense of identity and empowerment for women and their daughters in a society that looked that women were invisible, amorphous, ill-defined, and disappear. It gave women confidence that they had greater control over their lives in a society that hopes to breed the notion that through bride price and law we belonged to men, and they have been ordained to control us because we are women. So when we organized at Heat of MaSisulu, we unlearned our listeners and our hopelessness, never to allow these to return again. And the base of those values and those skills and those inclinations, aptitudes that we learned at her feet, we carry in our souls, in our struggles that continue, and in the activism that we embark on to this living day. We became strong and more able to face the adversities that inevitably come with activism. Activism brings trauma, whether it is against apartheid or any form of illegal or illegitimate power or tyranny. So MaSisulu taught us that if you are being beaten at home, fight against the abuse, not only for yourself, but for all women across the world. It is this universal feminist, humanistic ethic that she emitted that should be the spirit of a rising movement in this country. It is this legacy that we should carry in our lives. We learned and taught each other that working for social change is an excellent way for survivors of trauma to channel the normal anger that results from having been abused or oppressed. Public engagement, she taught, also benefits advocates and other social service providers who sometimes feel frustrated. Now, I'm talking about her as a social service provider because I remember her with Dr. Asfat. She worked with Dr. Asfat providing a clinic in Soweto just near Regina Mundi. And they dedicatedly tended to the health needs of that community. Sometimes when you saw them, you would wonder who the boss was. But she would say that Dr. Asfat is her son. And he actually died in her arms. Physical and mental resilience play a part in everything from increased longevity to better mental health. And MaSisulu made sure that the families of Soweto and the families of all the women that she encountered had increased resilience and emotional support. Recently, in mounting the struggle for an independent public broadcaster, We learned the truth of MaSisulu's words and those of Judith Herman, who wrote in 1997 that these survivors recognize a political or religious dimension in their misfortune, that they can transform the meaning of their tragedy by making it the basis for social action. While there is no way to compensate for an atrocity, there is a way to transcend it, and that is the message of MaSisulu. But then I digress in my memories. What I basically wanted to say is, when women organize, magic happens. When women organize, education happens. When women organize, healing happens. When women organize, social enlightenment happens. When women organize, justice triumphs. When women organize, principalities fall. When women organize, power manifests as a force for good. When women organize, 1 million MaSisulus rise.
When women organize, power manifests for good. That's a powerful statement and thing to leave us with. Thank you for sharing your memories of MaSisulu with us. One of the things that struck me is how engagement and access to a woman like that in your formative years changes your life. And that part of what the loss of not organizing is in the present day is that young women, I teach first years, 19 and 20 years old, and young women feel very profoundly alone because the organizations that used to exist of solidarity, sisterhood, of building skills don't exist anymore. And so thank you for reminding us of that. I would now, I think we'll just go down the row, which means Thenjiwe, you got your wish after all. So we'll start with you, because then we can just keep the mic going all the way down.
So I study and I write about history, and I've spent years now in the archives of women's organizations in South Africa from the turn of the 20th century until the dawn of democracy. I have lots of women's voices in my head talking about different meetings, different manifestos, and one of the real joys of this is being able to step back and see the continuities between different moments, to see the threads that weave these women together, the ideas about emancipation, what that means, what that looks like, how to challenge patriarchy, and how to make sure that women's lives and experiences and needs are understood as central to the work of liberation. One of the moments that really brought this to life for me was in mid-2015, in the first days and the first weeks of the Rose Must Fall movement, sitting in the Achimafeja room at the University of Cape Town in those 2-3 a.m. sessions when the students had taken over the administrative building and decided to create for themselves the university that they wanted. And it's always amusing seeing people come up with ideas that they sincerely believe to be original. And I think this is a lot of us. We think we are a lot more original than we are. But it speaks to the power, I think, of a long women's history in South Africa. When we look at it in a linear term, it looks like there are moments of action and moments of inaction. But when as we've heard about MaSisulu already, she empowered people. So you could look at organizations and political movements and see her influence there, but when you really start talking to people who she mentored in the hospital, in these movements, socially, you see a much broader impact. And so these students who were talking about these really radical ideas of intersectionality, which they had heard for the first time from Kimberly Crenshaw. But when you read the 1954 Federation of South African Women's organized foundational documents, they say African women, as the overwhelmingly largest racial group, must always form the main basis of a multiracial women's organization. And based on this, they said any women's organization that stands outside this struggle, the struggle for national liberation, stands apart from the mass of women. These ideas of layered women's organizing, of women having many different parts to their lives, has been part of women's organizing in South Africa for decades. I'm starting with Thuto because MaSisulu was one of its founders, but if we wanted to go further back, we find these ideas. And it doesn't take, you don't have to scratch very far below the surface to see the direct connections between people who were mentored, who were taught, who were relatives of these women who were part of these organizations, and we see a much broader history. We also see the history of patriarchy and its violence and damage every day. One of the most difficult parts of those early days of the Rose Must Fall movement was seeing these young men, 18, 19, 20-year-old men, who were threatening these women and other feminist allies and saying, if you insist on bringing this feminist agenda of yours into our movement, it will collapse and it will be your fault. But like the women and the Women's National Coalition in the early 90s, they said if it needs to collapse, it will collapse, because liberation without it is not liberation. And it was incredible hearing them take this position that I read about in the archives, and heard articulated almost verbatim what these women were saying in the university, these 20-year-old women. And so I think sometimes the generations can feel so separated and so oppositional, but there's so much that unites us. And I think we seem this way because the contexts that shape us are so different. And so the way that we internalize these ideas of gender have to be different. Women today are talking about cis rights, trans rights, are talking about queer rights, are talking about gender non-conformity. The spectrum is much broader than it was before. And so this has to be reflected in the way that they talk about, that we talk about activism. But when you look at the foundational values and the arguments and the frameworks, it's incredible seeing them talked about in the Bantu Women's League, in FETRO, in FETSO, in Beijing. And it's inspiring to think that even in moments where it feels like we are in the wilderness, when this daily work of spreading these ideas of liberation, of emancipation, of equality, of real gender transformation, when we're doing this work daily, then the movement doesn't die. It lives on in people, and it's going to emerge later on in the way that it needs to in that future moment that's to come.
Thank you so much to Dora. That was so profound, and I think that the idea of these connections between women, that if you look across time, that the women who take up the struggle later are women who were mentored, who were in contact with the women that came before them, and I think that is probably less isolating than this struggle can often seem. And thank you for keeping to 4 minutes, 20 seconds just about. I'd now like to introduce Nomtuse, please, to continue the discussion for us.
Okay, thank you so much. I'm going to digress a bit and follow what I was to do. And in so doing, I would like to just be practical. So, I was
Please speak
informed
into your
that
mic.
the theme.
Speak into it. Hold close.
I was informed that the theme tonight, when women organize, that we should suggest ways of harnessing energy organizational power that was 1956 March, that we are honoring MaSisulu, Mbere. We were also requested to share some quotations from her. For me, she was not only one of the organizers of 1956. She was a member of the ANC Women's League since 1948. Then she founded the Federation of South African Women in 1954. She was one of the founder members of UDF, but was in jail when it was launched in 1983. She aligned herself with the struggle. For UDF's first anniversary, she stated, "I'm a great big mother. A multiracial baby is born." And she was banned for 17 years in Oregon. She was a calm woman of great courage, wisdom, and it is a pity that we remember her by naming one field after her and no substantial heritage sites, such as the university, not the one named after her husband in the Eastern Cape. We have no hospital named after her, yet she works as a nurse. And I know that there's a specialist store in Livonia, but I mean, that is not known. We want a hospital that is designated by government for her, an airport, etc. While I attest to the fact that the 1956 march was a result of many months of organizing or even years of planning against a system that oppressed black people as a whole, I want to suggest that this march was successful because women organized around one issue at that time, and that was the DOPAS, or reference book, or ID nowadays. So, reading Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, she states that we should not depend on a single story as it creates stereotypes, and that the problem with stereotypes is not that they are not true, but that they are incomplete. They make one story the only story. However, referring to my own experience when women in the country during the UDF organized a plan on political issues, the women found organizing in the women's movement to be successful, even in the 1990s, as it was anchored on a political dispensation. I therefore do not disregard the political structural issues in which the examples I will make are anchored. So, one of the first I will be looking at is that in 1956, the women organized around the protest. It was a single issue, but it opened other doors. In this case, women played a major role of focusing and organizing. But for me, the major challenge is that we know of a very few of those women, very prominent ones. But if you talk about 20,000 women, a lot of those women have been invisibilized as far as I'm concerned. And that shows the characteristics of illustrating intersectionality of class and gender. Because some of them were rural women, they were white, but you don't, we talk about, we can select a few, but we don't know most about them. Another single issue that at the height of 1976, during the political unrest, the students used Afrikaans language as something to organize and unite, and that broadened into a political organization in general. And then in the late 1990s, if we remember the TAC, it's a big organization. It still has multi-dimensional issues, but it's organized around, the accessing of positive women, HIV positive women, ARVs, and through that, a lot of positive people access ARVs. I will be quick. In 1994, 1995, women organized around inequalities in terms of gender, and this is a broad argument. So it's difficult to have one. So we take aspects of it. So in total, for me, some of the things I've selected is that we have good one-issue organizations. We have sexual and reproductive rights and health, and they organize for that. We have LGBTQI that organize and advocate for that. We have different women in the private sector that organize as women in construction and all this. We have FISMA sport. We have race issues, and if you listen to 702, you see there, so we take the race issues most of the time. And then you have Sisonke Simani who will also do those things. And then when it comes to GBV, gender-based violence, we have people who write books. They take that aspect of Regicladi, Pumla Dineo, Gola. We have people who produce theater pieces, Nafo Mashian. We have people who organize one line campaign, and recently the total shutdown. Okay, so for me, if then we are focusing into the future, I'm thinking that we could still take other issues, elimination of teenage pregnancy, lobbying for a concerted judicial system that really prescribe, what will be punishment that fits the crime, let me say. We should focus on rape in universities. We know already that this month only, there was a rape in Forte, there was a rape in Rhodes, there was a rape in Stellenbosch. We must focus on killing of lesbians compared to killing of gay men. And we must focus on femicide. And then in terms of future organizing strategies, which we were asked to do, I think the big movements can no longer be there. We don't have the kind of money for them. But the issues that we can take, we can use the internet, social technology, webinars that women can affect thousands of people. We can have social media like the total shutdown, and we can focus on these single issues that are anchored in the more structural. So that's my approach.
Thank you, man. Thank you for bringing us towards the purpose of this event, which is to talk about what do we do? What do we actually do with the resources that we have, and how do we organize? And thank you for bringing up, with the TAC, many people will speak about sort of the big, the Zakia Platz or whoever who was working with it, but actually the work of black women to form that organization and to really engage and be at the front line of activism, notably Prudence Mbete, who passed away last year. And I think that telling those stories is one of the ways in which we know that these things are not impossible. It's possible for us to deal with our struggles today. And finally, last but not least, Ambassador Mtintso.
Well, thank you very much. Now that I'm the last one, and you know that I come from far, I know that we have affirmative action for me. And also, because you are young, we will respect age. I think that probably we should start by taking our flags for those who have fallen, especially recently, MaSisulu and Queen of Ndaba, one of you not known, and many others, known and unknown. The celebration of MaSisulu is quite a difficult one this year, I must confess, because we are also celebrating Mbere. And the truth of the matter is that if you just look broadly, you find that her celebration is sort of in the back burner. And probably we were waiting for August, and then we wait for October when she was born, which is very unfortunate because these are two icons that were there for a long time. But for me, MaSisulu is an embodiment of Ubuntu. And I think when we talk about women and gender struggles and any struggle, this notion of Muntu has to come back. We've got to find a way of reintegrating it. We were told to tell stories, and then I've got a lot of these stories of MaSisulu, and now I cannot tell the stories of MaSisulu. But just one that I would like to just highlight. It has already been said that MaSisulu had the capability of leading, but also of molding people. I was one of those fortunate ones who was put under banning order at the same time that MaSisulu and Mamoyo were put under banning order. And I thought that they were very subservient because they observed the banning order. So I was breaking it left, right, and center, just so sure that I'm brave in the ideal time. And one day, breaking this banning order in Orlando West, MaSisulu used to assist us in convening meetings by making us work in her garden. So go there as if we're working in the garden, and the meeting actually would be taking place with MaSisulu hovering around us. So I was in one of these garden projects. MaSisulu came and asked me, "Why are you here?" So I said, "Well, explain it." And he says, "Well, I don't want to say it's foolish, but I think that you have not thought this thing through. Because now you are going to be arrested just for banning, and not observing your banning order, and you are likely to be in jail for a long time, and what do you gain?" So when we do things, and she used to say, "Mama, I guess this. Break a banning order just because you want to show off I's excellence." We are also celebrating a very difficult time. Something has gone wrong in this country.
Yes.
Something, the dream of MaSisulu and many others, is failing. And I think that it's high time we actually face this. Many reasons, and which I actually articulated, but I don't have that time. But there's a low-intensity war, especially against women. And the methods we've used in the past may not work, but they may also work. But we need to be looking at that. Kenzana is still very fresh in our minds. One of the key problems, of course, is patriarchy, and we talk about patriarchy from a feminist agenda, and everybody describes patriarchy. The difficulty is that patriarchy today is coexisting with democracy, which then confuses us when we think about a democratic government and we count the ministers that are in government and parliament. But patriarchy knows how to attach itself to an organism. And in that way it takes the colors.
That's right.
Like a chameleon, it changes itself. And I think sometimes at home you feel like you're sleeping with the enemy because patriarchy is right there. And that makes it difficult for us to deal with this patriarchy. Now, in South Africa, where did we go wrong? Especially after 1994. I won't trace the period before, because some of us were in the Black Consciousness movement. We're learning, we're getting the baton from MaSisulu, no Willie, no Mashop, and many others. But now, it's a little bit confusing. What went wrong? One of the key things is this scattered voices. I agree with you to say that we should have issue focused, but again, we should be able to speak together. One of the painful things is just last week on the 1st of August, when there was this hashtag shutdown, and people were shutting down in different places, and others were not wanting to shut down with others because they wanted to wear their uniform. Now, what is a uniform when there's such a big issue? So this thing of us not being able to speak with one voice. During the time of when we were going to elections and everything, we were able to unite across political lines, across race, across class. And when we could see that we were under attack as women, because now men, especially in the ANC, thought that we should go back to where we belong, to the kitchen, because when we were in the camps or wherever we were, those were extraordinary times. Now these were ordinary times, we should go back. It actually is the women in the ANC that confronted that very Nelson Mandela. but also in other political parties were able to do that. But what has happened of late is this collapse or near collapse of our women's movement. We had something that was called National Women's Coalition, which we formed as we were going towards elections 2 minutes. But that is collapsed. Then we gathered and said we are forming progressive women's movement. They are individuals, but there's no movement. They are individuals. And some of them are leading a movement that is non-existent. And what also existed, we did have a gender ministry. Now we have a gender ministry. But it is failing us, as the truth, I'm not being controversial. But the gender ministry is. And we should look at this because it is failing us, because it is put there in that corner to look after issues of women. So we've got to assist even the gender ministry. And we also have got this, the them and us syndrome. Them who are in parliament, us who are outside, them who are old, us who are young, them who are in the world, this them and us. We were able as we were going towards negotiations. So in my view, I agree with what you're saying to say, but I still do think we are able of forming a very strong women's movement. Not what we're not doing. Yes, of course, we struggled under different circumstances. And unity is one of the best things. But not just unity. Unity in action. And united action. Activism. I know that there's this fashion of discussing feminism. I went to Fraser and they were asking me, when you were in MK, were you feminists? Were you promoting feminism? Actually, I didn't know what feminism was. I didn't know that. What I knew was that I was struggling for the liberation of women, and within the liberation of the country. So I don't know whether that was feminism. But it's good to talk about these things. But let's move young people. Can you talk and say that, you know, we did this, we did that, but now, do confront your government. It's your government. Why is it that in government, or government has failed to implement many of the protocols that it has said? There are many of them. It's not implementing them. Why? Why is it that government does not see the crisis, especially on violence against women, in the same manner that it has seen HIV and AIDS? Why? And why are we not talking about that? You've got a deputy president who is the chair of the council of HIV and AIDS. We don't have any deputy president or any president who's a chair of our council. Nothing like that, except the office of gender committee. So I think that you've got better opportunities. See, now we had to go to MaSisulu's garden to pretend we were there. But on the social media, and sometimes we just abuse it when we could actually be using it for very, very constructive things. I sometimes follow, and I think, well, I think this is a waste. They could be doing something else. And these WhatsApp groups, and my grandchildren don't have airtime. But when they have, we give them airtime, they're doing, what's up, bro? When do you want to talk about this? So, the message for me is that we can form a women's movement. And the message is that it is in your hands. You're the young people. The future is yours, but build it now. We built our future. We're living our future. When I was struggling as a person, I was building my future. You're the young future. I think the first question from Wendy is very specific. I know that you're saying that MaSisulu opened the garden for us, but we also went to MaSisulu. So it's mutual. There's no way that I'm going to know that you think that I can mentor you, because it's again a self-definition. I'm not going to wake up one sunny day and say, come girls, come young ladies. I'm going to learn from you that whatever you've heard about or of me, you think there's something I can do. So I will do that once I'm approached. I'm lucky enough because I work in Malawi, and if there's one backward country on gender issues, it's that country. And they are looking for these kinds of mentorship, and they are very happy to just come anywhere and say, please talk to us, just tell us about yourself, how did you do this and all that. And they are looking up to South Africa, because we've been leading until Rwanda overtook us. But we've been leading on these matters. But once we disintegrated ourselves, then others took over. So I think that there must be this connectivity. I don't know whether you create a WhatsApp group. I agree with this thing of the tension between the state and the movement. It will always be there, because the state is there to protect its statehood. So when it acts, it does not act in necessarily your own interest. It needs you to have tools. You cannot use the same tool for any attack. Talking militarily. You've got to say this particular one needs this kind. And that particular one, there's got to be a moment where you negotiate. There's got to be a moment where you just fight your way through. There's got to be a moment where you're arrogant and being able to even say to your president that, you know, Mr. President, we called you here not to compromise us. We know what we're about. So there's no way of, this is the state. The rest is state. We were able to act against it, and it was going to shoot us, and it did shoot us. But this particular one can shoot us, but is reluctant to do that. Yes, I agree on this question of the intersections. There is no universal sisterhood. It does not matter where you go. There's class, there's race, there's gender, there's sexual orientation, there's a region. But you've got to find common ground. Even when they were marching at that particular time, they were not universal. You had white people, you had rich people, you had rural people, but they found common ground. And common ground may be well what Nomtuse was saying, that find an issue around which you can begin to jam. But you can't just wake up there and say, hey, sister, is my sister. And in fact, this debate, just to remember, this debate in the ANC, at least when we came back, there were women who, some of us said, even if they were to make themselves available, we would not support them because of their positions in other issues. They were not going to necessarily represent us. So you have to say, yes, I want women, but this kind of thing. I think that this PhD, I think it's actually imagined. We pull her Down syndrome. We don't pull each other down. In fact, men are worse. They kill each other. Yeah. They don't care to be pulling them, they just kill. You're a nuisance and you're holding on to power, and I want this power, I kill you. Yeah. And that is, even when you look at the things that happen in our country and outside the homes, it's about that men just kill. But because there's a focus on us and our style of leadership, and even when you've got to do particular things because the women themselves are not coming to the table, and you can't say that, no, I'm doing this with you only because you're a woman. The response most of the time is that women don't give others opportunity, but I think it's marginal. And I think that as women, you can deal with that. Because even as leadership, you are able to call another sister and say, hey, man, let's talk this through. Unlike men, they find it difficult to talk it through. Because we're born politics as women, we're not choice in the matter. We negotiate. You negotiate in the family, you negotiate how you sleep and when you sleep and all this kind of thing. So there's no way then that we can then agree that there's a pull head down. I think it's something else. I leave other things to
agree with Thenjiwe about the pull head down syndrome. Actually, there was something that I got recently that says, you know, when you talk about pull down, there's somebody who's down. So, you know, they are not necessarily putting you down because they are down there. I think the state and us issues, I think the state doesn't know what to do, really. That's why we have, you know, when you read them, they offer you summits, they offer all sorts of conferences and things because they really don't know what to do. And in any case, this country really is run through commissions. I mean, right now there will be a commission on PIC, and somebody did a budgeting of how much these commissions cost. It's completely unbelievable. So when you think of the commission, so when they don't give you summit, they will give us commission, and we don't implement. We've got beautiful frameworks in this country, and we don't implement. We don't need summits in thinking. We just need to implement. Yeah. And then what Joyce was saying, during those times of 1954, which was the charter, and then we came to 1994, when we had charter, we organized around all different NGOs across the strata. So, you know, I think at that time there were about 87 NGOs in the Women's Social Coalition. It's impossible for us to have that, but like you're saying, we were all in the same space and we knew what we were organizing for. So it's important that, as Thenjiwe is saying, we should all be there and we organize together. It's important, especially as far as what we now call genocide of women.
I think there needs to be a view of the big picture. We need to have a big picture and view, and there needs to be buy-in into it. It's true that the march around, that attracted 20,000 women was around passes, but Thuto did a lot, had a much broader mandate than that. And when Bantu education was introduced, they took children out of those schools and created private schools so that their kids would have a chance at getting a decent education. They were doing a wide range of things. And I think that there was a view of the bigger picture and the role that, the personal sacrifice that needs to go into achieving this bigger picture. So I think this may just be the stage of late capitalism that we're in. It's increasingly difficult to have buy into the big picture when everyone has vested interest, when the person who's supposed to be providing services is also interested in their own cut of those things. So I think that that's one of the challenges. I agree with you that having a specific issue to organize around is useful, especially with large organizations. But I want to believe that it's possible to do many things at the same time and to have movements that can touch on multiple important issues. But I think this takes a broad buy-in and people to invest in this larger view. One quick anecdote. I'm in my research right now, I'm interviewing lots of people who grew up in freehold areas in Johannesburg, and I'm asking questions about the social mobility and the roles of professionals. And everybody says that educated people had a very important role to play in society because they understood that their duty was not just to themselves but to other people. So they would be reading letters to widows, they would be helping children, but they understood the privilege that they had as affording them responsibility to other people. I don't know how you promote this sort of ethos, but I think it's important and it's something that we're lacking right now.
Thank you. So I'm probably going to be a touch controversial and a touch conventional contradiction. Yeah. I firstly want to say there's also a need for us not to look back and see it as a golden era. We've got to build a golden era and a future, but we build it based on our past, and there's quite a solid foundation. So it's not as though all was good, because even in those instances, it was tough. It was difficult, and every inch of movement made was fought for. And it's not easy when you're in the battle. The battle hasn't stopped. And like Thenjiwe, we were in the same military formation, not in the same detachment. So allow me to just use that. So you fight for every inch. Having said that, I also want to go further and say that I do still feel that we need to look at impact and scale. It's not going to help to be fragmented. Yes, it's more difficult to organize, but not all organization and organizing was around finances. And there are creative ways to look at dealing with these issues. So if you say there's an issue and you've mobilized 50 million women around it, everyone is going to sit up. But if you have an issue and you say you have 50 women or 5 around it, they may be influential, but the impact won't be the same. And I raise that because as we look at these questions, and I think thanks to, is it the outsider's eye, we should also not just be inward looking as South African women. We must look at this issue from an African perspective and vantage point, and from a global perspective. So if we talk about 50 million women mobilizing around the issue, we've got 54 countries on this continent. And we have larger populations in at least, Phoebe, what's it, 6, 7 of the countries have about 80% of the African population in them. And if you look at the kinds of issues we're confronting, it's not unique to South Africa. You know, it's issues that we need to deal with across the continent, because the kind of sometimes inertia that we see and that we argue is there with the state, as in government today, it's there across the continent. And I think thank you, Ambassador Mtintso has made this point, and we need to look at how we take it forward. And I want to agree with everyone, you need a multiplicity of issues, whether it's a hierarchy of issues or otherwise, but let's look at how we can mobilize around it. I think the pull-me-down syndrome has been dealt with, and I do want to say that differences does not suggest that this means that you're rejecting and shutting the door, because differences are healthy as well. If we are all in agreement, then something is very wrong at the moment, because clearly we have a challenge around it. So even with the eye of our cause was clear, there were moments when it wasn't so clear. You know, yes, we were clear around the larger national issue, but attaining it and ensuring that we were able to get issues on the agenda wasn't always as easy. And I think this is something that you work on and strive towards all the time. And I think we're in a similar moment. So I want to conclude on a point that has been raised earlier. So much as we've moved quite a distance, and I think if you look at the kinds of issues that MaSisulu and her generation had put on the table, many of them have been attained, but not to the degree required. Because if you look at the Freedom Charter, for example, and the fact, and I thought that I'd just throw this out, and I know I must conclude, there were 3,000 participants, delegates, with the drafting of the Charter. 700 plus were women. Of that, I think one woman spoke formally on behalf of FEDSAW, and there was one that spoke from the floor. And yet, if you look at the organizing behind it, the women played a major role to ensure participation from all segments of society. Not unusual. Today we are seeing it similar in a different way. However, the issues that was placed on the table found its way both in the Charter and in the Constitution, around equality, on the issues of access to health, and all that kind of thing. Now, to conclude, and I said conclude earlier, there was a great debate. There wasn't always a view that there should be a women's ministry. And the office on the status of women was to be in the president's office. So there wasn't even a need for a commission. The president was responsible. I think it was an argument that came from women themselves that led to the marginalization. So at the end of the day, we must also be clear, what is it that we want? And once you have that, how do you ensure that you force the steel door open and keep it open? Thank you.
I just want to address two quick issues. Don't underestimate the power of a single cause. It can be the spark that lights the fire. The issue is this: the UDF is a collection of single issue. It was a movement based on single issues. Detainees Parents Committee, National Education Crisis Committee, the water committees in the townships. That is what ignited the moment of the ungovernability movement in the urban areas and ignited the rural areas and throughout the 1980s. So do not underestimate the power of the single issue. The issue is to create the chemistry of solidarity between those, to recognize the basic fundamental principles and values inherent in each struggle. The second thing I want to share is a recent playbook. Now, when we sought to take on Saudi Mafane and fight for a public broadcaster for the people of South Africa, we used the Section 27 Equal Education Playbook. And basically it is this, and I want to offer it to those of you who are waging struggles in the universities. First, look for an issue, a single issue that you can fight and you can mobilize your struggle around. Make sure that it's litigatable. Make sure that it's an issue of a constitutional right, because we need to breathe life into this constitution, to stretch it to its ultimate limits for it to yield the future we want. So the first thing you do is you organize around a constitutional issue and you litigate. So number one, litigate. Number two, socially mobilize around the litigation. Use litigation as a way of socially mobilizing, like they did with the Treatment Action Committee. You litigate around access to medicine. Then you organize the affected communities and beyond. Then third on the playbook is write about it. Thought leadership, research your struggle, benchmark it internationally. We went to Germany in search of models of public broadcasting. We wrote to the Finns, we stood outside their embassy and said, show us your model. So you must be prepared to walk the talk and put a lot of intellectual work into what you want. Number four, seek ways of drafting legislation, because as MaSisulu Jr. here said, that which is not legislated, defended, will regress. Your gains must become irreversible, so that generations that come after you are able to use the legislation or the litigation as precedent and to press future rights. Please, that's the playbook. On universities, sorry, Madam VC, the issue of the obligation to parents is the obligation of care, the obligation of the university itself to provide a safe environment for women. That's litigable. You can press a right and force these universities to take certain measures, but you need to research it, you need to organize, and you need to bring pressure to bear, and you need to bring these universities to a point of reckoning on the issue of safety of women. Because the low-intensity war, if it's not waged at this level of this generation, you will lose it for a future generation. Please read the paper.
We're looking for actionables, and we want to let you know that we, as part of the Sisulu family and the centenary of Albertina Sisulu, are actually embarking on the collection of women's history written from a woman's perspective, particularly particularly for the women of 1956 who are still alive today, their children and their grandchildren, and it's a year-long project, and Thuto, I think you roped in. Thuto, we're going to rope you in again to make sure that we make this happen. So that's the one thing, but we are making a call out for that, so that those stories are collected and that they're written, because the information itself is scattered. No wonder we are scattered as well in our organizing. Secondly, the other issue that we wanted to talk about is the Women's Summit is going to happen. It's happening on the 31st of August, as the President announced. You can decide to be part of the cause or not part of the cause. Your voice can be expressed there or not expressed there. Remember, the context in which we're in as government and in which we're in as a country is that government is going to review the structure of government itself. Whether the Department of Women becomes part of the presidency again or not will depend on whether you put your voice out there to make it so, or whether you keep it as a ministry. So there are changes that you can make and input in now. The 31st of August is one of your deadlines. The other one is the issue of actually indicating that the summit, that the other issue is you can influence and lead where you are, and that was what we talked about. But what MaSisulu did, and did very well, is that even as a single woman, wherever she was, she never forgot the cause of women. Thank you.
Okay, I'd now like to call on the UJ Women's Ensemble to please close the event.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Natasha. I'm the projects manager of the Oliver and Adelaide Tambo Foundation. Today of all days, do not forget Adelaide, please. We're talking about women. Let me read. While I can still be part of the Youth League, my eyesight cannot, so let me put on my glasses. Eleanor Sisulu writes in her book about Walter and Albertina Sisulu, at the end of 1955, the ANC Women's League and FEDSAW set up a joint working committee to coordinate the Women's Anti-Pass campaign. Over the next few months, women organized networks and held regular weekend meetings in townships and rural areas. The depth of popular resentment towards passes convinced the Joint Working Committee that it could organize a gigantic protest at the union buildings involving tens of thousands of women from all over the country. The Women's League and FEDSAW member, Ruth Mompati, and if you know, a powerhouse in her own right, who was working in the offices of Mandela and Tambo at the time, recalled that some of the men in the ANC were not impressed by their plans. I wonder what that's like, you know? Open quote. They thought we were being too ambitious and that it would be impossible to organize such a huge protest. Because we were part of the ANC, we had to keep the NEC informed about what we were planning. When it was discussed at the NEC, we heard that there was resistance to the idea, but Walter Sisulu said no. Let's see what the women can do. I can tell you that made him very popular with the women. End quote. Walter's faith in the women was vindicated, and in a feat of remarkable organizing, converged on Pretoria on 9 August 1956. Women made enormous sacrifices to make the trip, many of them traveling at their own expense. 70 delegates from Port Elizabeth raised £700 to charter an entire railway coach. It was reported that some women even sold their furniture to raise money for the journey. In Soweto, organizers of the march received information that the police were planning to stop women in groups of more than 10 from traveling to Pretoria. Albertina Sisulu was one of the leaders who had to ensure that the message was quickly passed through the ANC Women's League networks so that the women could find ways to circumvent the ruling. It would have been very easy to stop groups of women traveling by bus, so most women decided to take the train to Pretoria. At 2 a.m. on the morning of 9 August, Albertina was at Pefeni station buying tickets to distribute to women leaving from the station. The trains were filled to capacity, and she never forgot the electrifying atmosphere, and Helen Joseph deposited the petitions in front of the empty office of the Minister of Native Affairs. For a full 30 minutes, 20,000 women stood silent in the forecourt of the Union buildings before they sang, "You strike a woman, you strike a rock." They then dispersed quietly and went home to ponder on an event that was to inspire women for generations to come. I therefore extend my first thank you of this evening to the women of the 9th of August 1956. It is 62 years later, and we are no less inspired by their feat. I also would like to thank a descendant of that woman, Nsiki. Even though you fought me tonight, thank you for representing the Sisulu family this evening and sharing that lovely and moving tribute to your grandmother. Thank you to all the Sisulu family members who are present this evening. I hope, brief as it was, you think that we paid appropriate homage to the legacy of your matriarch. I would also like to thank the University of Johannesburg, DVC Parek, Professor Naidu. Thank you for collaborating with the Foundation to host this very important dialogue. Thank you specifically to Dr. Linda Mtwisha and Berenice Moody, she's somewhere here, for your tireless efforts in making today a reality. I would also like to extend our deepest gratitude to our friends at the Rosa Luxemburg Stiftung, but he's a man, and I made it very clear that only women organize tonight. So, Fredson, I'm grateful, but you were a conduit for greater things. Thank you to all our partners for sharing the Foundation's vision and helping us achieve it. The only man I will outwardly and openly thank tonight is the artist over there, Vusi Mbulali. Vusi is a good friend of the Foundation, and when we asked him to please prepare works of Albertina Sisulu for tonight, we had no idea he'd be here, literally preparing works of Albertina Sisulu. You can have a chat to Vusi later to see, because they're all for sale, but he is incredible, as you can see. To our illustrious panel, you are the epitome of courage and power and indomitability. Your words tonight have enriched this event more than I can say, and your lives are blueprints for greatness. Thank you. Lastly, I'd like to thank all of you for attending. To those who donated sanitary towels to the Nkantolo Education Project, we're so grateful. To those who forgot, 58 Bompus Road, Dunkeld, is the Foundation's address. I hope you all leave here today inspired. And most of all, I hope you translate that inspiration into action. As much as we need major systemic changes to solve the challenges women face on a daily basis, every little bit of action goes a long way to changing lives. Adelaide Tambo repeatedly quoted a Xhosa proverb, which says, "I will not refuse if I'm asked to perform a task." The women of 1956, those whose names we know, and especially those whose names we don't know, did not refuse their task. It is our time to accept our task and see all that can be achieved when women organize. Thank you.
My role is to just offer some closing comments. So, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the Faculty of Humanities in the University of Johannesburg, I'd very much like to warmly thank everyone who is present here today for supporting the event, for asking questions, for sharing ideas, and for memories that came from our panel, and for inspiring us. Special thanks to Natasha Ali and to Berenice Moody for being superb organizers, to members of the Sisulu and Tambo family who are here, and all our distinguished panelists and guests. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you here at the University of Johannesburg. Thank you to our DVC Professor Paruk, Dr. Mtwisha, and not forgetting our Dr. Mbete, for all the active roles that they have played to support this MaSisulu celebration today. So today's event has left me with very positive feelings, immensely warm feelings. And this is particularly because many of us have been very disillusioned over the past few months, especially about the state of gender politics in the country. So we left feeling somewhat energized by the spirit of the discussions that we have heard and the positive sentiments. So it is true that we are facing, and we do acknowledge, the numerous difficulties and the numerous challenges that women face collectively. But there's simultaneously determination, and there's clarity, and there's focus in the kinds of thoughts that have come out about where we are at present and about forging and shaping a particular path ahead. This powerful constitution that we have, one that safeguards the rights and integrity of women in this country. Gender empowerment and gender equity has been firmly on the state's public agenda since 1994. And a number of policy documents offer guidelines for actions that work in women's favor. But we should not take this for granted, and we should do everything in our power to ensure that these hard-won gains are defended and augmented. And that is what a lot of the discussion was about here today. What does all this mean if we have rights on paper but are referred to internationally as the rape capital of the world? Or if we celebrate our democracy constantly but are told that our country is not yet ready for a woman president? Or if our statistics show that universities are graduating women at a very significant rate, more women are graduating than men. Look at it, go to graduation ceremonies and you'd see that our women are excelling. But what does all this mean if we remain underrepresented in most of the upper echelons of government and of universities themselves? Women graduates earn far less than men, and for how long should this be the case? So the message from today is that there is much work to be done. We can in fact draw lessons from the past. As teachers, many of us, and I'm one of them, who would be constantly asked about, why should we celebrate the past? Shouldn't we now begin to think afresh about our new realities? Does the past have any relevance to us today? And I think if we look at MaSisulu's life, we certainly see, and if we listen to our speakers today, we draw on those lessons from the past and think about how it can help us to craft our new futures. There were 101 different things that came out today about the relevance of MaSisulu's legacy for us, but I think I'll refer just to 3 brief issues that came up. And the one was about the Sisulu legacy, about vigilance. Her story is one of perseverance, about caring and hardworking, being hardworking, and about being resilient in attempting to improve the status of women. And we need that resilience as well in attempting to shift particular mindsets, the mindsets of men who have lived under patriarchy for generations, men who would be threatened by women in power, and of women who are finding themselves in increasingly powerful positions. Another important element that I would draw from Sisulu's life and that has come up in different ways today is of her being highly principled. She stood for the truth, as someone said. So we need women as principled as Albertina Sisulu, who can show us that they will not be deterred. And someone referred to flirt with unethical issues, and who can serve as role models to a younger generation, women who can stand on their own and stand their ground. So she teaches us that, and we leave with that message in mind. But I heard the strongest message coming out in terms of Sisulu as a unifier, a woman who could build solidarities. We do need women leaders, whether in government, in civil society, at universities, in the media, or elsewhere, who will seek to build those solidarities, who will work around differences of race, class, and age, and assist and be part of building this united front of women, and to incorporate progressive men in the full knowledge that we can only transform our context and society through united action. So we've heard all these contributions. We need common ground. We need to think about the contributions of our panel and help us to reflect a little bit on what do we do now. We've explored our context. We understand the challenges facing us. What next? And I particularly like the idea of the strong women's movement that has come out from our panel. We need a tsunami. We need a strong women's movement. We need to defend and advance. And I was most impressed to hear our Vice-Chancellor say we need to become disruptors. So with that in mind, I thank you all very much for being here, for supporting this event. Hopefully we'll have more of this at the University of Johannesburg. And I like the idea of looking at this critical, single, powerful issue that can help to mobilize and ignite the tsunami that I think we all need. Thank you very much.